Hi and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers the Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Cory and my pronouns are he and him.
And my name is David. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him.
And we've got a long list of articles this time around, but only like roughly 5 stories to get through. So
yeah, there's a lot to talk about in each one, and I will try and refrain from being my normal verbose self. Try and keep things a little bit more contained.
We'll try to be as brief as possible.
There's big stories.
Yeah.
You know, not even just the fact that we had some time off again. Just need to skip a week. But just even had it not been for that, there would be a lot to talk about, or at least the stories there are to talk about are quite big. So
yeah, that's right. I mentioned this on my other show because I missed 2 weeks of publishing things as well. It's just extra work because everybody at my workplace, a whole bunch of them got COVID, and then my dad was sick, so then I just didn't have any time to do any editing or recording. So
yeah. You have a life outside of doing podcasts, so this is not your career. As much as it would be awesome if it could be, I think everyone knows that this is not a career type scenario for you at this point.
Yeah, this is a side gig, and if I don't have 40 hours to put into each show, then they suffer.
Okay.
So I guess we might as well start off. I won't bring it up on the screen because it's Ryan Miley steps down as the leader of the NDP. He's going to stay on as the interim leader until a new leader is found. And it's I kind of think this was predictable in a way.
I guess.
I know some people are drawing conclusions with the loss in, what was it, Athabasca?
Yeah.
Because it was normally an NDP stronghold, or it was viewed as an NDP stronghold, but the Sask party took it. And I'm not entirely convinced that that's the reason for this, because I don't know. I think with 24% of registered voters voting in that election, it's pretty hard to say that that's a definitive victory for the Sask party.
Like Miley has at times both impressed me and been meteorically underwhelming. We've talked about the NDP of the last however many years. NDP since Roy Robineau has essentially been a string of relatively nondescript, relatively similar carbon copy white dudes. Like, it's from Calvert to Miley. I could probably name most of them in between just because I've heard the names. But if you put all of their pictures up on a screen and ask me to tell you which ones were which, I don't know if I could. The thing that frustrated me the most about Miley coming in, he ran for leadership, I believe it was 2009 and again in 2012. So he had run previously for the leader on 2 separate occasions before winning the leadership in 2018, but didn't go for a seat. So he didn't actually run to be an MLA until after he became the leader of the party. And if you just sort of came in, if 2018 was the first time he ran, sure. But how come after 2009, when he said, I'm interested in becoming the leader of this party, he didn't get more involved in actually being in the party?
Right. Yeah.
And I guess there's other ways to support a political party other than being an MLA, but that's kind of where you should be putting your focus if you're going to be the leader in the legislature.
Yeah.
And to resign less than 4 years after winning the leadership seems Yeah, it seems like abandoning things just because you didn't win. Now, maybe the idea being is if I couldn't win, they deserve someone who can, and fair enough. I guess maybe I'd be frustrated if he demanded to stick around even when a better leader would do better.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I don't know. He won. I think what was it, 72% support from delegates at the convention.
Right. That's still a pretty strong leadership vote, right?
Yeah, like I think if he came in under 60%, like even at that point, if you come in at even slightly more, like you come in at like only 62% support from delegates, okay, maybe that's a sign you need to move aside.
Yeah,
I don't know.
But
it seems unfortunate, although it also seems like the party might end up picking a non-generic white guy this time.
That's true. Yeah,
and maybe actually go with the best candidate. Because that it always gets twisted the other way. Oh, if you're not picking, if you're picking someone this, that, or the other thing, oh, why don't you just go with the best candidate? I'm like, they are like,
yeah, that's right, they are.
the nondescript white dude who's never been in the legislature in his life wasn't the best person available. There were some really strong candidates who never even made it into the top 3 or 4, right? Like at the end of the day, last time around, the final couple people that it was sort of came down to, again, were bland, generic white dudes.
Right.
And so it sounds like this time around, there might be something a little different to pick from. And we're going to be able to pick from strong legislators who have been doing the work for a few years now. And I'm optimistic that might actually put some spark into things.
Yeah, there was an article that came out on looks like February 22nd, so about 5 days ago, talking about some of the potential candidates. There's Betty Nippy Albright. There was Carla Beck, Nicole Saurer. Though this morning she put out a tweet saying that she's not going to be running and put her support behind Carla Beck. So.
Yeah. And Alina Young was the fourth name that got sort of put out there. But Alina also falls into that category. Again, more experience than Miley had, but has only been in the legislature since the last election. Although prior to that, she has considerable experience on Regina City Council, which is sort of where I know her from, or know her name from, I should say.
Right.
So, yeah, it'll be interesting. If those are the 4 candidates that are in the running, then, or I guess 3.
Right. Yeah.
If Sauer has said she's not running, then honestly, I'd be pretty damn happy with any of the 3. All of them are, again, strong legislators, strong voices in the community. I think willing to actually take a stand on things. Because at the end of the day, I think that's maybe there's others who disagree with me on that. Well, I'm sure there are. But I honestly still to this day think the biggest thing that's hampering the NDP is they've been trying to be too safe. They've been spending so much time and energy trying not to lose.
Yeah. That's not, it doesn't inspire anybody, right?
No. So. Right. And why do you worry about someone? Okay. If someone's never going to vote for you, no matter what you do, they are never in a million years going to vote for you, then why worry about making them hate you less?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And as much as Karl Rove is a horrible person, and as much as his political philosophy was on the other end of the political spectrum, his idea that you don't need to win the center, you need to motivate your base, I think is problematic in many ways, and I think maybe we do need to have a little bit of balance there. But there's something to it, right?
Yeah.
It
is a road to victory more so than
if there are 30 people who are current Sask Party supporters, and you can bend and cave and be bland and boring on so many things, you win 2 of those 30 supporters over to your side, or if you have 30 people who are currently staying home and not voting at all, and you can get 10 of them energized and excited about coming to the polls because they think you actually stand for something, that latter one's better. Right. Now, admittedly, the 2 people you pull over also take away 2 votes from the other side, right? So again, there is something to be said for trying to have platforms that appeal to more than just your base. But I also, again, think you got to then come up with ideas that appeal to centrists, use the dirty word, not just trying to be scared of offending the far right, because they're going to be offended no matter what.
Exactly.
Like, there is nothing you're going to do. There's no policy that you could do that's going to make John Gormley wake up in a couple months ago. You know what? That NDP, man, we should consider voting for them. Like, no, that's not going to happen, right? So stop worrying about what fodder you're giving to John Gormley, because he'll find something.
That's right.
It doesn't matter what you do. You could come out and have a policy that says
you could literally
drinking water is good for you, and he'll be like, "Fucking liberals making you drink water all the time," right? Like, it doesn't matter.
They want to force you to drink water.
Yeah. You know who else forces people to drink water? Waterboarders. Like, it'll be, no matter what you do, they will find a way of twisting it. So instead of softening your approach on everything, have some bold policies, like have something that legitimately gets people excited.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, that's I've ranted on this soapbox a few times. And I'm excited that we might hopefully get someone who understands that.
Yeah. There's one of our third article regarding the NDP leadership. Just kind of is a discussion of how this exact thing. Like, do they rebrand? Do they come up as a kind of a new party, or do they just go with a new leadership? Or like, what exactly is the NDP or the quote unquote electoral left gonna do in Saskatchewan to get more support? And I've been on, there was a Twitter Spaces discussion I don't know, got to be a week and a half ago now, where people were discussing the progressive, what do progressives do in Saskatchewan now? And this seems like there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot that can be done. We could actually, if we, and I include myself in this because I will be voting for the NDP next time there's an election. But if the left could come forward with a vision that can inspire more than 30% of the populace to vote in the next election, I think they really could pull this out. We'll see. Yeah,
it'll be an interesting phenomenon. I don't know what the solution is. It's the last provincial election had just barely over 400,000 people vote. If you look back into, I was just looking at that third article, it talks about 1958 and 1960. They had nearly 700,000 people vote, and the population of the province was significantly smaller. So
there's not, when less than 50% of your population is voting, which I guess not all of those people are voting age, eligible voters, but if you're at that level, then something is going on, right?
Yeah. And I look at this chart of voting history in Saskatchewan. If you look at the final election before the creation of the Sask Party. So if you look 1995, that was the last election pre-Sask Party. The Conservatives were in third place. The NDP had, it was a 3-party province at that point. The NDP had either over or close. I think they had over 50% of the vote in a 3-party system.
Right.
From the looks of things, next was Liberal and next was Conservative, or at the very least, Conservatives and Liberals were neck and neck. So you have 75% of the province voting for a progressive party.
Right.
Now, the Liberals were pretty right-leaning in Saskatchewan, and they did move on to join the Sask Party.
Right.
But that's a huge shift from then to today, and that's only 27 years. So, like, I think there's obviously people in the province who do support progressive ideas, even if the current branding of them isn't in their style. And again, like I said, I think you excite people, gets you more people than trying to be non-offensive.
Yeah, well, speaking as someone who actually generally doesn't like electoral politics, when I see the party that I would vote for pulling to the right and being more apologist for those kinds of policies, that turns me away from even being involved. Happens all the time.
Oh, yeah. And, like, I get called both a centrist and, like, a super duper lefty commie, like, pretty much in equal portion. So I don't know which. Or I also get called, like, a right wing nut job too. So I guess maybe that does make me centrist. I don't know, but again, I just think it's the Hamilton line, right? I'd rather vote for someone who stands for something, even if it's something I disagree with, than someone who stands for nothing. And the NDP have been a party of Aaron Burr for a good 20, 30 years now. Like, since Lauren Calvert, we've had nothing but Aaron Burr in charge. And I think you need to move past that.
Yeah, for sure. Scott Moe, the Sask Party, and COVID. And I put them all together because COVID, I feel like the Sask Party and Scott Moe's policies are actually keeping COVID alive in our province.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess a good place to start is kind of like we are ending our mandates. All mask mandates and everything is ending as of March 1st. So earlier in the month, they cut off counting of cases, and they cut off the vaccine mandates for various places, which, I mean, to give them some credit on the cutting off of the vaccine mandates, some of those rules were really weird. Like we've talked about that before, where in order to go get alcohol and take it home, I have to have a vaccine passport, but to go to church and sit in a pew with 100 people, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was a hodgepodge. I would argue perhaps that was more, perhaps we needed to simplify or tighten them up in the other direction rather than just abandoning them altogether.
Sure.
But, you're right. They certainly were inconsistent and haphazard.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the no masking and things, especially when we're still having very high numbers. And in fact, there is one of our articles is talking about Scott Moe talking about how the death rate is concerning.
February, one of the issues that we talk about, how things that they're not reporting at all, they've also put delayed reporting in for deaths.
Yeah.
So we actually don't know what the death rates are until like 2 weeks after.
Right.
So we're seeing this weird delayed response, but from everything we can tell, or a week and a half, I guess, I think it's about a 10-day delay. From everything we're seeing, February 2022 is going to be the highest number of COVID deaths since COVID started in Saskatchewan.
And that's messed up.
Right? Like, we're getting rid of it when it's at its worst.
Yeah.
It's like if you have this big hurricane response and you put all these guidelines in place and you put all these rules in place, and then all of a sudden in the midst of the worst part of the hurricane, you lift them all right when the storm's at its heaviest. And I guess we're not feeling it because we've just gotten used to it.
Right.
But
also, some of these mandates that are being lifted, they literally don't hurt anybody's day-to-day life. We're all going to work in person. We're all going to the restaurant when we want. We're all going to buy weed and buy booze. We're all doing all the things. So what exactly is lifting these restrictions doing? And
I don't know, maybe that's the thought, is they're not doing anything to prevent it either. They're just not sufficient enough. So why bother?
Well, I mean,
having them at all. I don't know if that's I don't know.
I think we probably agree that probably implies that we should have a little bit harsher restrictions.
I would agree. Yeah. No, you're right.
But instead we're going the other way.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer on that front is. It just seems bizarre that when things are at their worst, we go, oh, that's wrong. The other thing that is fucked up is putting in rules that prevent individual organizations, companies, school boards, whatnot, for having their own rules.
Right.
So it's like this isn't just, okay, the government's not going to force you to have these rules anymore. It's also, also you're prohibited from having these rules.
Yeah.
Like the complaint had been for how long we don't want big government telling us what to do, even if it's to save lives, freedom, freedom, freedom. Oh, but if it's freedom for companies to actually have their own guidelines, no. Now it's not okay for government overreach when it's to save lives, but government overreach to require people getting dead, that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Governments implementing rules that kill people isn't a breach of freedom. Governments implementing rules to save people is the breach of freedom.
Right, yeah. I don't understand.
Messed up. Because you know what? Like, if someone honestly, super small government, doesn't believe, big, let business operate on its own, like, I'm going to have some disagreement. We've had some people who have commented in our YouTube videos, like, they and I are going to disagree maybe on the broad philosophy, but I can respect if you're going to be consistent. Okay, I understand you're putting a greater value on a certain principle than I do.
Yeah.
But then you throw that exact principle out when it doesn't win for your team
in favor of whatever.
Like prohibiting individual companies from having guidelines in place is as big government as requiring those guidelines.
Yeah.
Like if you have a health inspector that comes in and says, hey, you're not allowed to have rat feces in your food. Okay, yeah, that's big government telling restaurants what to do. But it's also big government telling restaurants what to do if a health inspector comes in and says, you're required to put rat feces in your food.
Yeah, that's right.
These are also big government overreach.
That's right.
And I don't, it baffles me that the small government libertarian crowd all of a sudden doesn't have a problem with government overreach when it's governments requiring companies to not have COVID guidelines.
Yeah.
Because if it was if your thought process was, okay, but it's the tyranny of private industry. Okay, sure. But that's never been a libertarian argument any other time. That's never been a libertarian argument that, okay, companies imposing rules on employees or customers is also a form of tyranny. That's antithesis of libertarian view.
Yeah, like
sorry,
libertarians.
You're pointing at something.
Libertarians actually believe that that's true, or that is okay. The tyranny of your boss is fine.
Right.
So
you should also be okay then with companies saying you can't come in without a mask.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
right. Like if a company wants to continue to have those extra rules, why are you now all of a sudden okay with the government prohibiting that?
Yeah.
I'm like the flip side, oh, well, you're being hypocritical too. It's like, no, I'm okay with governments putting restrictions on things. I think it is the role of the state to have certain limitations within reasonable bounds.
Right.
I'm a pretty, red in the wool Canadian in that, I'm a big believer in the first article of our Constitution that says all of our rights, or not Constitution, in the Charter, all of our rights are subject to reasonable limits. I think the reasonable limits clause is probably the most quintessential Canadian constitutional element you could imagine that says, okay, we believe in all these things, but let's be reasonable.
These will be limited.
It is a reasonable limit to say, here's some rules so that you don't accidentally murder people. That seems reasonable.
That seems okay.
But trying to make the argument from the other side, okay, but I think it's reasonable to require you to murder people. That is not an equivalence.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, I'm getting myself all worked up.
That's all right.
It pisses me off. so much that the inconsistencies and the hypocrisy are so freaking blatant, and no one on the right seems to be having a problem with that level of inconsistency, that they're all of a sudden fine with big government if it's their side being big government. Sorry, we should move on to a different story because I don't know how much more there is to say.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's too much more to say.
We'll report in 2 weeks about how the death rate in February actually was the highest in all of freaking COVID. So
yeah, the only other thing was, and it speaks to the same thing, is like the Saskatchewan Party renewed the emergency order on the same day that all COVID-19 measures are going to be lifted.
Yeah,
it really points to that exact same situation where they're talking out of both sides of their mouth, really.
Yeah. Because the emergency is labor laws exist, right? Like the emergency is, it's an emergency that we're not able to suspend labor rights whenever we want, and we can't violate contract because all of a sudden, as a conservative, I don't believe in the sanctity of contract law anymore.
Yeah.
Like one of the key differences, again, the Sask Party is certainly not libertarian by any stretch. Like when you do look at libertarians, one of the key differences between libertarian and anarchist, like there's a bunch of them, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
But like is the idea that the state still has a pivotal role in the enforcement of contract. Like one of the universal across 99.9% of libertarians, they will tell you, what is the limited role of the state? What are the 3 things you do think the state should do?
They enforce those contracts.
Is the enforcement of contracts. Like that's pretty key to libertarian philosophy, is that private citizens can sign contracts with each other. The contracts need to be sacrosanct in order for trust to exist in the private sphere. The state should be responsible for enforcing those. That is a functionally beneficial role for the state. But not when it's feasible for the government to go, oh no, we just don't feel like it. We don't want to have to. We don't want to have to honor the contract of our health workers. Health workers aren't important during a pandemic, but it's an emergency and we require them.
Mm-hmm. Somehow.
Mm-hmm. Do the Alberta approach and just make it illegal for them to quit.
Yeah, you could do that. That's not big government, though, right?
No.
All right, so we'll move on a little bit to the convoy. I've got a few stories here where we did have convoy protests or convoy style protests in Saskatchewan, in both Regina and Saskatoon. The one in Regina that I have in the article, there was a truck towed, and the farmer who had his truck towed is very unhappy with this. And that's about it, I guess.
No.
I got into a bit of an argument on Reddit about this because I said, okay, so the consequences of protesting that leftists, Indigenous land defenders, Black Lives Matter protesters have all felt multiple times. This guy actually felt a consequence for protesting his thing. Yeah. And now he's super unhappy about it, and all of his supporters are super unhappy about it. I mean, you're not getting any sympathy out of me except to say, okay, yes, sometimes the police come down on protesters too much.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and this thing with Scott Moe going to fight the Emergencies Act in Ottawa in court. Also ironic with our last story of he's fine with extending the Emergencies Act in Saskatchewan that he's had in place for significantly longer, but also it is unreasonable for the Emergencies Act in Ottawa that Trudeau had for a few days and then ended the second he didn't need it anymore. Don't get me wrong, not a huge Trudeau fan, and having to defend Trudeau lately has been a little bit nauseating. But on this, I got to hand it to him. He said he would stop using it the second he needed to stop using it, and he was true to his word true. On it. But if I almost called Kenny Klein, if Kenny and Mo win, I'll be happy. If they get the Emergencies Act struck down and have it declared unconstitutional, great. That's a win. This is a tool that is going to be it was a law put in place by a conservative government.
Yeah.
Largely with the intent of suppressing left-wing, like this is a right-wing piece of legislation that fucks over the left, or would fuck over the left, as a sort of Damocles over the head of left-wing protests. Yeah, great.
Yep, that's right.
Let's fight all of these things so that when they get used to far more harsh extents against BLM protests or against Indigenous protests, like that would be wonderful.
Yep.
So like, exactly. I hope they do win. Like I absolutely hope Mo wins. Like it's gone now anyways, so great.
Yeah.
But like, if it gets struck down, I'll be super happy. So anyways.
My first thought when I saw that Mo and Kenny were going after to fight the Emergencies Act, my first thought was, what about fiscal responsibility? Like, this is going to cost money.
Oh, yeah, money, for sure it
will. This money could go to something beneficial to citizens of Saskatchewan. People always ask, when you want to put into a program in place that helps people, where's this money coming from? Well, where's the money coming from every time we go to court?
Every time one level of government sues a different level of government, and government is paying for government. Yeah, no, you're right. 100%.
See, where are my fiscal responsibility bros are? like, come on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, again, I'm on the opposite side of them on this. I think it'll be great if they win. It'll be a triumph for left-wing protests. And left-wing protesters in the future, if this gets struck down, we'll have Scott Moe and Jason Kenney to thank for the court precedent on the like, if it that'll be great. Do I think it'll happen? No, I think Moe and Kenney will get laughed out of court because the Emergencies Act is reasonable. It is quite frankly a softer version of the War Measures Act that we don't have anymore, right? Like, or if we do, it's not implemented. I don't actually know if it was repealed.
To the best of my knowledge, it was repealed.
I basically think it was repealed, and then the Emergency Measures Act was brought in after, because we still needed something.
Yeah.
So again, my knowledge of history on that is a little bit fuzzy, but
I know lots of people have been talking about it lately, so that's the information that seems to be in my head. So, like, this
isn't the same War Measures Act that Trudeau Sr. implemented.
No, that's
the one that the Emergency Act, I think, was 1988 that it was brought in. I think it was Mulroney who brought in this one.
Yeah.
I think I think it was in response to the War Measures Act being essentially struck down or repealed. But yeah, no, it's this weird topsy-turvy. You're really fighting for the other side, so good on you, because the other side's the side I like. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Let's see, what else was there with this convoy thing? There was, I don't know, there was some stuff that went on down at the North Portal gate, like border crossing. I don't think anything too major happened in Saskatchewan. I know there was a lot of news in Alberta about the blockades and stuff. And tactically, I'm not entirely against what has been done by the convoyers, and like they're obnoxious in a lot of ways. Like, and especially the stuff in Ottawa where they're honking their horns 24 hours a day, and they were like disturbing regular people. But as a tactic, some of what they did has potential to be used, I think, by people with good causes.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, the use of heavy machinery in a protest is new, right? Like, that's not a thing that you see in other protests.
It makes a smaller group of people more powerful. In a lot of ways, like, because the left is often being either small groups of people, or if they have a cause that you can get a lot of people behind, then you have the large groups. But even a large group of people still ends up with lots of backlash and like, you still don't have that ability to shut down things the way you do if you have like giant machinery.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was where this came from too, right? Like in terms of total number of people, this protest had way, way, way less than many of the others that have gone. It's just they came with tanks.
That's right.
So not actual tanks, obviously, but like you come with a semi that has an impact.
Yep.
We talk about Regina, like our impact or Saskatchewan's impact on South Albert a week ago. I remember it because I took a picture as I was going by. The owner of Vortex Power Wash Limited used one of his company trucks to blockade the entrance to another business. So they were blockading the entrance to a pharmacy with their giant ass semi, while people wave "fuck Trudeau" flags and whatnot. Right? Like it's that's not like if it was just the 10 guys with flags standing on the sidewalk outside of the pharmacy, okay, maybe someone might not go to that pharmacy.
Right.
Having the giant ass semi truck
it
makes a
it.
difference.
Yeah, it guarantees that you can't go in there. Yeah.
But we'll see, right? Like, I hope there's actual consequences that do exist within the private sphere for some of these trucks as well, right? Like it's I remember going, okay, well, I now know never to use Vortex Power Wash Limited. And I went to their website, and one of the services they offer is like COVID disinfectant cleaning services for your business. I'm like, okay, hey, maybe don't hire the COVID conspiracist to be the one to clean your business for COVID.
Yeah, that's right. And there is actually online, like there is a spreadsheet going around with businesses that have and pointing out their position on COVID mandates throughout Saskatchewan. I know that oddly enough, the right has been very against this collection of names and collection of business names and describing their COVID opinions. But
oh yeah, for sure. And like I've talked a couple times, I can't remember if I've done this on our podcast before. One of the difference between a liberal and a leftist, because I always have that, like, okay, where exactly is that line? And one of the big ones is a leftist is willing to use unjust means to accomplish a just cause, whereas a liberal is unwilling to ever use unjust means for a just cause. Doesn't matter how just the cause, and is okay using just means for an unjust cause. Like the idea of a liberal is that you're hyper focused on the means, not the end. Right. Whereas the left and the right tend to be a lot more focused on the ends, and it doesn't matter what means you use to get there. Right. And you have this sort of utilitarian arguments and all of that to various degrees, mix, right? And I think when it comes to protesting, we get very, very even people on the left will sometimes get sucked into that liberal idea of, okay, I need to be consistent when I talk about what type of protesting I'm okay with. Right. And at times you need to go, well, no, like we do need to look at what we are protesting for. Yeah. Like what is we can't just evaluate the tool in isolation. You can't just say it's never okay to use a hammer. You need to sometimes say, like, when is it okay to use a hammer? When is it okay to use a certain tool? Yeah. And I think there's value on both sides. I think there's, you have to look at the tool as well. Sometimes you go, okay, like that I understand your goal. This tool we should not like. Yeah. Again, you need to look at both sides of it, and I don't want to get trapped into both sidesism. Again, I think this idea of, using private tools, private communication methods for recognizing the shitty behavior of companies, that's okay.
Seems fair to me.
Yeah. So.
Yep, for sure. One of these stories on the Emergency Measures Act was an interesting agreement between the left and the right in Saskatchewan. The NDP also came out with some members of the NDP caucus saying that they didn't think that the Emergencies Act needed to be invoked. So yeah. So that was interesting.
Yeah, that's fair.
Not too often they agree.
No.
So,
like, the left and the right do agree that they hate Trudeau. Like,
yeah, that's right.
They'll agree for different reasons.
Yeah, that's right. I would often argue that the right hates Trudeau for reasons that are incomprehensible and make no sense.
Fair.
But
they hate him because he's not on their team. He's on the other team, right? Like, he hates like the right to a large extent hates Trudeau for the same reason a Rider fan hates the Blue Bombers. Like, they haven't, like, okay, yeah, there's probably a few things they've done that you don't like, but for the most part, they're pretty darn similar to your guys.
Yep.
But they're the other team.
And if he was on your team, you'd like him.
That being said, though, you know what? The left sometimes does the same.
Oh yeah.
Like, I think there are legitimate criticisms of Trudeau, so don't get me wrong. I am a long way from a Trudeau fanboy. But even just this last couple days, I know we're going to touch a little bit on the Ukraine-Russian situation at the end.
Yeah.
I saw someone who I know was pretty far left going after Chrystia Freeland for the Ukraine stuff, and like the whole, her great grandfather was a Nazi collaborator 100 years ago. Like a lot of that can come from the left.
That's been fairly consistent on the left, actually. Like the Chrystia Freeland criticism.
Yeah,
because
but using the Russian invasion, like becoming pro-Russia because the Ukrainian, like that shift from the left is pretty shitty. And attacking the liberals for their support of Ukraine is pretty shitty. Like, again, that is not a rational reason for going after the liberals. And the fact that Russia was communist a half century ago is a pretty weird reason, and not like a pretty authoritarian version of communist 50 years ago. It's a pretty weird reason for someone on the left to support Putin.
Okay, and my history might not be perfect on this, but what I seem to recall, what I've read a little bit, Putin was part of bringing down the Soviet Union. Like, he wasn't like a buddy to, I think it was, I better not say any names because I'm going to be wrong. But if I recall correctly, he wasn't just like, he wasn't like the communist guy who was like, yeah, actually, why are we turning our country into a capitalist country? Like, he's been
an authoritarian all along, right? Like, he was an authoritarian within the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And when the Soviet Union fell, he saw the opportunity, and had very little, he's an opportunist. And
ever since he took power, he has been changing the rules every time that he's supposed to end his reign. He changes the rules so that he can continue. So
a president for life is not democratic.
No, that's right.
So, and like, again, people saying, don't call Putin a dictator, but I'm okay calling Trudeau a dictator.
Right. Right.
I saw the phrase, and I shit you not, when talking about Trudeau the other day, I saw the phrase, the dictatorship of democracy. He used the election 4 months ago to impose the dictatorship of democracy. Words certainly have meanings.
They mean things. They mean things all the time. That's hilarious. I know. One of the things that came out of the convoy actually was like some of this Trudeau hate, and I always feel like I have to preface it like, I do not like Trudeau.
Yeah. No, you're right.
But you can't do a hashtag called Blackface Hitler and about Trudeau and pretend that you are on the side of like reasonable, good thinking humanists who are on the right side of history. You just can't do that and be correct. Like,
yeah. Well, and like you have the Conservatives now considering Pierre Poilievre, who like as of like a couple years ago used a pretty offensive racial slur for Black people.
Yeah.
While still going after Trudeau and didn't apologize for using a thing Trudeau did in high school that he did apologize for.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. What Trudeau did was shitty and awful.
Yep. 100%.
Like, I think sometimes there's this trap of, oh, well, you're defending him. Like, no, it's shitty and awful. I'm glad he apologized. Words aren't the only thing. Quite frankly, if he apologized for that and then had led a government that prioritized things like clean water for Indigenous communities, support for Black Lives Matter movement,
sure.
Like had he put his money where his mouth is and backed up his apology with actions more than he has, I think he's done some good things too. Then yeah, I'd say that apology does make a difference to me.
Yeah.
An apology is important. Just can't be the only thing.
Yeah.
But when you have someone like Pierre, where it's just like, no, I'm not even going to bother apologizing. I'm going to just say, oh, it's not really a racial slur. I'm like, when everyone knows it is.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's outside of the realm of Saskatchewan specific politics. But
yeah, that's
sure
right.
We'll talk about that more as time goes on.
So the CBC has an article here. The Saskatchewan, there is no longer a sex designation on the driver's licenses and identification.
Mm-hmm. No, there still is. You just can choose to have it blank.
Yeah, that's right. You can choose to leave it blank.
Yeah, so we've been able to have an X, but now you can just have it blank.
Yeah.
And that's a positive change, because having an X draws attention to it. And a lot of times, as much as the right wing likes to portray trans people as all, attention seekers and all that, for the most part, just what they're saying is we'd rather just be able to live our lives, and we don't just want to be able to live our lives. And yet that doesn't say there aren't activists out there who are drawing attention to important things. But for a lot of folk, just like, you know what? No, I just don't want it on there. It's not important to be on there. I don't want to have that. So.
Yep. And this is something that I think is good too. The SaskPower to spend $2 million on EV fast charging stations. 20 of the facilities will be built on major corridors. So this is really cool.
Yeah.
The environmental crisis that we are actually ignoring because we're in a pandemic is not solved by electric cars, but it does help. So this is good. Just, I think, objectively good.
And for those who understand electric cars, these are going to be level 3 charging stations. So when they say fast charge, they're not even just meaning level 2. These are going to be level 3 charging stations. So that means it'll just be about a half-hour charge to fill your tank, as it were. So yeah, it is still slower than gas, but
it's great.
Yeah, it's a big win.
Yep. I would totally random. I think that I would like an electric car just for the fact that when I'm filling my gas tank, I don't have to then stand outside of my car and hold the thing for another 10 liters to go in after it clicks off the first time.
Fair. Honestly, like for mine, like you can buy level 2 chargers for your house as well. And they basically are the equivalent of like a dryer outlet.
Right.
Vent. Like it's their 220. It goes 110, 220. I think I'm not an electricity guy. But I just put mine into a regular wall outlet. I never bothered investing in the level 2 charger because I never needed it. I always meant to get around to it. But for the 5 years I owned an electric car, never once needed it. And it's just, you get home, you plug it in. It's almost like you pretend it's winter year round. You get home, you plug in your car.
Right.
and then you just never have to fill it up with gas. When I had to switch back to a gas-powered car, going to a gas station again after 5 years of almost never having to do it. The only time I ever had to go to a gas station when I had an electric car was on big long road trips across the country when we used my ex-wife's car, not X at the time, and we would drive across the country and get gas there. But like 360 days a year, didn't ever go to gas stations, and it was lovely.
Yeah, kidding.
I hate going to gas stations now. It just I'm like there's so many times like gas lights on. Okay, it says I have 50 kilometers left. I'll wait till it's down to 20. I don't want to go stand out in the cold. Like, and I know it's a petty. That is a first world problem, bar none. I get that. It drives me freaking nuts. So electric cars are so much better than gas.
But also, like, at the price of gas right now, like I spend $600 a month on gas going to and from work. So that's not nothing.
An electric car would be 60. Usually you can tell it's about a 10-to-1 ratio.
Yeah. So
and that's just if you're buying all of your electricity from Sask Power. That's not even including if you have solar at your house or whatever. Right. You have your own charging station or whatnot.
During the day, I would plug it in at work, and then I would.
Just be aware. Most of those plug-in spots are only turned on in the winter.
Yeah.
Because they're there for block heaters, so they're not working the rest of the year.
Well,
but
my work's a little different, but
fair. But when gas was $1 a liter, because that was the price I sort of budgeted out for. When gas was $1 a liter, the amount of distance I could drive on 1 liter was about the same as what I could drive on about 11 cents of electricity.
Right.
So I did the math on it. So it's usually about like I said, little less than a 10-to-1 ratio. So if you're spending $1,000 a year on gasoline, you'd probably spend about $100 a year on electricity if you had an electric car. So now, again, until these corridor ones are built, you can't get all the way to Saskatoon on an entry electric car. Tesla, you probably could, but like on a Nissan Leaf, at least a 2012 Nissan Leaf, you could not get to Saskatoon on a supercharge. Well, I don't know if a 2022 Nissan Leaf can. They might have just bigger and better batteries too. So
that would be the problem for me, because I'm driving basically to and from Saskatoon every day when I go to work.
Yeah.
So, or a little short, but
yeah. Well, soon.
Sask needs an additional $112.8 million for COVID-19 costs, according to Health Minister Paul Merriman, who said the dollars are needed for the massive fourth wave, which he claims was not anticipated. It's too bad he doesn't listen to us, because we could have told him.
Yeah.
So.
Shocking, right?
Yeah.
The fact that this happens so often, with conservative politics, mock the people who tell you a thing.
Yeah.
A year later, go, why didn't anyone tell us a thing? Like, we have you on record mocking the people who told you the very thing that now you're saying no one could have ever predicted.
Yep.
You must think liberals are magic or leftists are magic. And you see it with economic stuff all the time. Going back years, but I talked about that with the Dutch disease and Stephen Harper and over and over and over again, you have people saying, hey, there's this thing you need to be worried about. Tangenting here. It's a very ranty episode. This is a preview of 10, 15, 20 years from now, when all of these right-wing politicians are going to go, no one could have predicted the impacts of climate change.
Yep.
No one could have known that this is what would have happened.
Yep, that's right.
I guarantee it. I guarantee we are going to hear no one could have known. In the same way, again, I said we're going to talk about Russia and Ukraine in a bit, but you still have, no one could have known Trump's policies towards Russia would have led to what it's happening now. Like, yeah, no, this is what
people said
for
this.
8 years now. People have been saying this is going to happen. For 8 years, people have been saying this is what's going to happen in Ukraine. For 2 years, people have been saying this is what's going to happen with COVID in Saskatchewan. In general terms, and in specific terms, for the last 2 months. We have been saying, and people far smarter than you and I have been saying, we're going to get hit with a fourth wave. Yeah. We've known this. And like lifting restrictions is going to make it worse.
Yeah.
We've known this.
Yep.
So, yeah. Sorry. It's fucking bullshit, and I'm angry.
If you want us to think that you're either not dumb or not lying, then you have to actually pay attention to what's being said by, by leftists and liberals and people who, scientists, like either you can't hear us or you're not paying attention to what's being said.
Yeah. Well, and I think Witherspoon talked about how like the costs are a reflection of the provinces mismanaging the pandemic, and the mismanagement has cost Saskatchewan people their lives, but it's also costing us money. Like like in the prioritizing lives versus the economy, the Sask Party fucked both.
Yep. That's right.
It's like, it's pretending you don't have a problem. And it's going to get worse. We are going to have a greater healthcare crisis coming out of the pandemic because of the stress put on the healthcare system that didn't have to be. Like, when it comes to the Federal Emergencies Act, I do think it was justified, but you know what? I can definitely accept the argument on the other side. Like, was it overkill? Like, again, I disagree, but I don't begrudge someone saying maybe it was more than was needed.
Sure.
The Saskatchewan Emergencies Act, all they're using it for is to abuse healthcare workers. That's the only thing they're using it for. They're not using it to make the province safer. They're not using it to deal with the actual crisis itself. They're using it as a way of abusing healthcare workers. And what's going to happen is in a year from now, we're going to hear, no one could have predicted that all of our healthcare workers fucking quit. Or like moved to other provinces or other jurisdictions, or we've had an increase in stress leave and sick leave. We've had increased costs. Oh, no one could have predicted that this would have led to a nurses' strike in a year from now. No one could have predicted the lawsuit from the healthcare unions. Yeah, we can. You're fucking up. Stop doing it.
Yeah, that's right. Russia invaded Ukraine. There are bad takes all over the political spectrum. I don't want to give leftists a pass. I'm arguing with them on Twitter. I'm seeing them on Twitch. I'm seeing them everywhere, the bad takes from leftists. But also the right and centrists are also having bad takes of their own. So here's Scott Moe's bad take on Twitter. Just to be clear, both Canada and the US will continue to import oil from Russia because our national governments consider the construction of oil pipelines from Western Canada a greater threat than Russia, apparently. So Scott Moe has taken the tragic events in Ukraine, the absolute awful behavior by Russia, and he's turning it into a pro-pipeline message for so that he can attack Trudeau. Yeah. And he can claim, we're suffering in Saskatchewan.
But he'd be also the first to complain if there was an oil embargo on Russia.
Yes, of course.
Right? We know that, right? We all know Mo would have had an identical tweet criticizing Ottawa if there was an embargo on Russian oil, which, to be clear, I think there should be.
Right.
Again, I think there should have been 8 years ago. And again, I want to be careful of my partisanship, not tainting and using this crisis for cheap political shots.
Right.
I think there needs to be some acknowledgement, and I'm trying to, again, I saw how a couple people have used this circumstance to attack Freeland, and it's been super gross. So I want to not fall into the same trap with the Sask Party and Mo, but the fact that our campaign finance regulations in Saskatchewan allow Russian oligarchs to donate to the Sask Party is fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, that's not okay. That you have Evraz that is owned by Russian oligarchs funneling money into Canadian political parties of a very specific persuasion.
Yeah.
The fact that the Sask Party has pages of donations received from Evraz is worrying. Like, that is troublesome, and I'm like I said, I'm very nervous about doing the nudge, imply things, do a smear, and I guess essentially that is what I'm doing, and I'm. But it is there. Like, this isn't just a weird implication. We know factually, like, this isn't a mysterious cabal of Rothschilds that,
right. It's not those globalists.
No, like, this is a specific company owned by specific people giving specific amounts of money to the Sask Party.
Yep.
And other political parties in the country as well. And Evraz not receiving sanctions is weird and fucked up, and Canada federally should be doing that. Like,
I saw an article today discussing whether or not Russian products should be pulled off of Saskatchewan liquor store shelves. And I mean, I think yes, but I'm not sure that that's going to do anything, but except send a message, right? It's a symbolic thing.
How often have you and I talked about, and by you and I probably just mean me, talk about the fact that people underestimate the coercive power of the state. And we talk about that a lot on the micro scale when it comes to law enforcement.
Right.
How we don't need to bring in cops with guns as often as we do. And when we talk about white collar crime, we're not advocating for, cops with AK-47s bursting through windows in the headquarters of a tax evader, because there's a coercive power of the state that can levy punishment and consequences in a far more varied form.
Yeah.
And the fact that when it comes to the Ukraine situation, this talk seems to be, should Canada send troops or not? Like, that's its own topic. And quite frankly, I still need to do a hell of a lot more listening on that topic before I can understand where that goes. And I don't envy the people who will ultimately have to make that decision at some point, or who are currently making those decisions.
Right.
Where are troops? Where should troops be? At what level are we assisting when it comes to actual physical violence?
Yeah.
As far as selling arms or donating arms, or even having troops on the ground to defend what is ostensibly an ally. But aside from that, we have so many other tools in our tool chest. And the fact that Evraz is not under sanctions.
Yep.
And you say, okay, well, why are you punishing the private citizens? Fine. Have Abramov, I think, is the main owner of it, or the oligarch that owns it. Like, okay, if he wants to renounce his Russian citizenship, like, great, he can do that.
Well, we see. Sorry to interrupt, but we see why we would put pressure on private citizens like that, or private industry like that, because already there's a number of billionaires from Russia who are saying, "Hey, the Russian state has gone too far. We have to stop attacking Ukraine." There has been not a large number, but like 2, but they're billionaires. These people have power. They have influence within the state. So So if they are affected, then they can affect what's happening.
Yeah. So I would like to see Russia removed from SWIFT. Hopefully by the time people are listening to this podcast, that's already happened.
Yeah.
We're recording Sunday night, or Sunday afternoon. So like I said, I'm hoping Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this week, we see a news article about Russia being removed from SWIFT.
Yeah.
I would like to see economic sanctions extend to Russian-owned companies, or companies owned primarily by Russian nationals, like that.
Yep.
At this point, severe economic sanctions, I think, are warranted. And again, this is one of those times where we can sometimes fall into a trap, and referencing what I said earlier about, are a means inherently good or evil, or just or unjust? And I think we've talked in the past, or I've, in other contexts, talked about how economic sanctions can often be unjust, because when used against a small fledgling nation, not fledgling's the wrong word, but a smaller nation in terms of size of the economy, not any sort of qualitative or subjective measure of the country, but just purely in terms of the size of a country's economy. If you're using it against a country with a small economy, in a lot of ways, it's just the everyday people who suffer, not the totalitarians at the top. With a country as big as Russia, that's not actually going to be the case. I think you will still see people on the ground suffer, but I think that's going to happen no matter what at this point. But I think that's one of the ways you tighten the screws on Putin, because then you do start seeing more of the oligarchs pull their support at that point, when they can't go to their London penthouse, or when they are losing money because they can't sell their Russian steel to Saskatchewan. That's where you hit them. And like this story has so many different ties to Saskatchewan. I know we try and stick to Saskatchewan-based stories, and we could probably do an entire 5 hours just on the Ukraine situation because of all the different connections to Saskatchewan. Like Canada has if I'm not mistaken, the largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world, diaspora in the world, much of which is in Saskatchewan and other prairie provinces, right? Like,
my kids are part Ukrainian because their mother is part Ukrainian. So it's
and that's an almost a universal prairie experience, right?
Yeah, like we all have direct ties to the events that are going on.
You're seeing Indigenous communities across the country post pictures of kokum scarves because of the close ties between the early Ukrainian immigrants and Indigenous communities. Like a couple weeks ago, I posted a silly picture. I was at a souvlaki restaurant, and I said, people used to think poutine's the ultimate Canadian dish. No, this is the ultimate Canadian dish. And it was a donair place because it was like donair pierogies. And I'm like, that warmed my heart, right? Like, I don't think you can get a more Canadian meal than donair pierogies. But like, Ukrainian culture is so heavily steeped in this part of Canada. And I think we are going to be talking about it and hearing about it and feeling the impact of this very, very deeply in this province as this story unfolds. I think by the time you and I have a podcast again in 2 weeks, it's going to be a completely different world for people in this province.
For sure. All right. Well, with that, you can find us at anchor.fm/FromManyPeoples. Our Twitter is at SKPoliticsPod. We are at Facebook.com/FromManyPeoplesStrengthPod. And you can email us at FromManyPeoples@gmail.com or support the show at BuyMeACoffee.com/FromManyPeoples. Thank you again for joining me, David.
Thank you, Cory. I appreciate all the work you do as always. So I will let you get onto that 40 hours worth of work you do in all of the behind the scenes stuff on your various podcasts.
You bet.